Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week is part 1 of 2 with an interview with Nana Amoako-Anin. And Nana is a yoga studio owner in Ghana, Accra, and she and I get to talk shop about all things yoga teaching, yoga studios, and the industry at large. Nana's story is incredibly interesting, as she's had a varied and international childhood, including at one point she was working as a prosecuting attorney in Manhattan, which is fascinating. And like so many of us, she found her way into yoga and realized that the work that we do as yoga and wellness professionals is important in supporting people's health and healing. In this week's episode, the two of us dive into why our access to capital is so important as an industry, and we rarely talk about that. We get into some nuance on that phrase trauma or trauma-informed, which I believe is about to reemerge as a recurrent trend for 2027, and how the US and North America can serve as a cautionary tale for other parts of the world where we see wellness as an industry really surging right now in popularity. Now, we failed in the US to build infrastructure that would support our workers and ultimately our students, and my hope is that we can encourage other parts of the world to do things differently. Now, of course, before we begin, please consider following, liking, or subscribing to the podcast from wherever you're listening. It truly helps support this work. And if you haven't read TikTok, my new State of the Profession trend report, the link for that is in the show notes. It is long, 30 pages, but it is a true critique of the industry with some solutions about where we could go in the future. Now, let's get into it, my friends, with the first part of my conversation with Nana Amoako-Anin. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, I feel like I have to calm down because I'm really excited about this conversation today. I have my new friend, Nana Amoako-Anin, on the podcast. Will you tell everybody who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Yes. So thank you for the wonderful introduction, Rebecca. I'm so excited to be on your podcast today. So where I am first, I think is more grandly important, is I am actually in Ghana in West Africa. So I'm centering Africa Day in this conversation, which I think is so exciting to be with you as somebody who I've admired from afar, although the lens of my life brings me in and out of the United States. But this is an incredible opportunity to platform your work in conjunctions with your curiosities about Africa and practice here. So I am many things. I think we in life tend to self-identify with one sole element, but I think my story lends to the fact that I've been able to undulate between different meanings in my life that all come down to one thing, which is love, of course, and advocacy. So I do own a yoga studio here in Ghana. It's called Bliss Yoga Accra. But my story of how I came to own a yoga studio and became, I think, a healer very early on in my life before we could even term, I know our communities and cultures have used the term yoga teacher, right? It has been coined over many years that I think simplifies our stories. But healing, I think, is usually to yoga teachers comes far beyond they even get the title, right? So I began my journey, life journey in the United States. I was born in the United States to two wonderful parents who were Pan-Africanists who met in Ghana, where they're from, who met at the Legon University and later moved to Berkeley in California. My father studied economics and my mother moved to Cambridge. They later merged in San Francisco and started their life. They are development people, so that means that they have lived lives in development work globally and particularly specifically focus on Africa. And maybe that is likely the influence of how I sit here today. My journey to become a practitioner of yoga began as a teacher out of college, out of Columbia University, as an art student who was very creatively minded. I was very interested in the body. And so I studied art, but in my format, in my research, in my work as a sculptor, I focus on the female form. And I never knew that that may lead me into being more fully understanding of what embodied really means in the body. And I got out of college and ended up as an art teacher in New York City in the public school system. And of course, that's where we need our well-being, right? Learning the system that was in many senses broken, but how really positively people were willing to attune and change and help. So I spent a lot of time there as a teacher and then eventually went on to law, where advocacy again and healing work is still conductive of all things. After law school, which I had led to through art, the love of art, I decided that I would hopefully work in advocacy. And eventually I was hired by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York City. So I spent
Yeah.
a good, amazing part of my youthful career as a practitioner, somebody who always was interested in human support as a prosecutor. Again, the body became the sole purpose of my work. I worked with women in flight, domestic violence, child endangerment. And of course, that's where I began to understand that trauma is connected to our life in sensibility, that we do sometimes need a different outlet. And that's where the yoga practice came, of course, being a practitioner of over 25 years, from early days. My life changed when I started the DA's office, but after a lot of stress-related disorders, which I would say insomnia, weight loss, the acne of a 13-year-old girl because of all the stress, every doctor I saw said there was nothing wrong with me, all the MRIs, they just said you need to do yoga. So
Of course.
leaving the system, the criminal justice system, I went on to Wall Street and I worked there in compliance and other roles. And eventually the New York bubble decided to change for myself and my husband and my daughter, and we decided to move back to Ghana. And that again was a choice about how are we going to live a well life, all
Yeah.
the while learning that the early healer was already there. And at that point, before arriving in Accra, I did license to become a teacher and ended up in Ghana with everything that I thought I needed to maybe be a lawyer in Accra, right? To spend
Yeah.
time in that space, but realize that advocacy on the human level was more exciting to me early days. So I did open Bliss Yoga Accra in 2013. We are a 13-year-old studio. We started with 15 students and rose to 800 members in about 6 months of opening. We had to, from a business side of yoga, in a luxury hotel, we had to break down a wall and build out a studio to make it more full service.
Wow.
And so business went from a few people where yoga was the practice was still new in Accra in terms of a lifestyle practice, turned into 800. And so the curiosity of the world came to my door, and every, major publication outlet came through our studio, from France 24 to CNN to BBC. They were so curious. And I think that's really a great juncture to kind of close my intro in saying that on the business of building a community, right? And the business of building a yoga studio looks very different in Africa. Yes.
Oh, well, now you know. I'm tell me about that. I mean, I have, as you know, a lot to say about how we build our communities and our spaces of belonging. Um, Tell me what that's like in Africa.
Yes. I think I'll open the conversation about how I became a studio owner as an important juncture about how we talk about systems of building. I
Yes,
think if we look at the United States,
yes,
where I
yes.
did go to high school and some elementary, and my parents lived in Zambia when I was a youth, but I moved to the US when I was about 11. So I grew up in the US. I realized that, health and wellness, the culture of health and wellness from a perspective of identity is generally a Western framework. We look at it
Totally.
as we classically would view somebody of myself. Also, interestingly, I can talk about this more personally because I was raised in a very international culture as a young high school student at the Madeira School in Virginia. However, raised in an environment, high school, in a place where the view of luxury and health was really more of a white-centered view, right? If we think
Yes.
about, I went to high school with girls who had horses, and had like, brought
Yeah.
like four
Yeah.
horses to the stable every year and switched them out, and were ice skaters, right? And so that's what we
Yeah.
culturally, there's some amazing people that are still some of our very close friends, but that's what we culturally think about what the well-being or just sort of the health environments as we think about people. Who are those people? So when you
Mm.
move across shore, somebody who's had that history and appreciates how the cross-pollination of me as an example of also sort of elitism and privilege, right? Then we move me to Ghana, where when I first arrived, there really weren't any yoga studios. There were a few outlets, but very few. And so, from my standpoint, I think it was easier for me. That's why I say it's difficult to do this in Africa because I came from a position, and I'll say that, of privilege. I
Sure.
had worked a career, I had built resources, I had built a home in
Yeah.
Africa before I even moved here. So I was able to really self-build this structure. If we look at a yoga studio as a brick and mortar and have the wherewithal and ability to flow this more simply than somebody else, maybe who had been raised here locally in Ghana, who
Yeah.
maybe didn't have resources to take on such a venture of a location of my nature, which was opened in a luxury hotel, which I
Yeah.
was renting a unit, right? So that brings it into a bigger perspective. So I always advocate for people listening around the world around this perspective that yoga is still a luxury sport in a way around the world. We are not limited to just saying that it's inside of our American capsule, that we do need that. But in America, we have other systems that support us, like small business loans. And, you can
Yes.
get a loan to buy all your jade yoga mats. You can get a loan to do the lighting and get the CCT cameras and
Yeah.
to do your marketing, right? But in this environment, and not to desensitize or diminish the fact that Africa is a very high structured place in terms of the financial markets, the experiences about how we do business and where there is capital, because we are maximalists when it comes to capital for Africa and all the businesses and many of the people that live here. But to start something, it does take a certain amount of, and I'll call it vitamin M, that in America, you might have more resources to pad you up for the first 10
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
and say, this loan is going to take me through year 5. Whereas for myself, I didn't have year 5 or year 10. I just had,
Yeah.
how am I running? How am I renting? How am I paying the rent? How am I paying the cleaners, the accountants, the marketing? And how is that sustainable for somebody who might have a different profile than I did? So I'm actually very glad that I was able to set up because I think I set an example to be able to now have this conversation with you about what it
Yeah.
takes.
Yeah. Okay. So from what I'm hearing you describe, it's essentially business ownership without any kind of safety net.
I think that and I've also been somebody who has built other businesses as well. So
Yeah.
as a technology entrepreneur, as somebody who co-launched a technology firm here in Accra that's an AI practice, I can say that there's a whole conversation about how funding comes into businesses in Africa. And so as I began my journey, of course, new to opening a yoga studio, I needed to do all the things like the business plan and explore incubators and amazing incubators that are in Accra and in Africa that can help educate young entrepreneurs. And I was established in that, like the Tony Illumino Foundation,
Hmm.
um, where they do talk about the fact that you could get money. Sure, you could get, we do get funding. I think your question is true. It's like generally though, but somebody who's maybe groomed locally, it may be more difficult if you aren't as educated as where you're going to get venture
Totally.
capital,
Yeah.
where you're going to get angel capital. Are you even able to feel confident to be in rooms where you can talk about that type of
Yeah.
negotiation? So
Yeah.
yeah, there is a big capital infusion, and I'll talk about like the tech the tech explosion that happened within the last 2 to 5 years, where young entrepreneurs were getting seed capital of $10 million. We're getting seed money from Silicon. But is that accessible? When we think about the accessibility of building a yoga business, I would venture to say that for most people, that's not accessible unless we're coming with a certain demographic and a profile that I'm
Yeah.
standing as a case study and an example of.
Before we keep going, I want to tell you about something I built because it didn't exist and it should have. Inside Yoga Magazine is a trade magazine for yoga professionals, not a wellness lifestyle blog, not a beginner's guide to down dog, a trade magazine, the kind that treats our work as the legitimate profession it actually is. It's digital, it's ours, and it's the first of its kind. If you've ever picked up a trade publication in literally any other industry and thought, why doesn't yoga have this? Well, now it does. You can find it at insideyogamagazine.com. The link is in the show notes. Yeah, I think so. This might be a funny story. So I spent a lot of my early 20s living and working in London and traveling through Europe. During my tenure working in London, I actually got offered a job that I sometimes regret that I didn't take, working in tech in Kenya. So I would have moved in 2000 to work in the tech industry in Kenya. And so, like, I do sort of follow that narrative only because I feel like there's this other, reality version of Rebecca that said yes to that opportunity. And she's
Mhm.
in Kenya somewhere working in tech still.
Yeah, yeah.
So I find this whole story that you're telling me wildly fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm interested. Okay, so we've established the privilege, and it's the privilege to be able to walk as a certain
Mhm.
kind of human with the education
Yeah.
and the confidence of saying, I belong in this room.
Yes, thank you.
And also, you run a yoga studio, which is the deconstruction of that very exact thing.
Mhm,
How
mhm.
is, tell me about that because that is like the awareness and understanding of the privilege and also sort of that coming into the inner part of you that is exists beyond those narratives. Like, can we talk about that for a second? Because I just feel like you would have a lot of interesting things to say about it.
Yes. And I mean, I think landing here was important because what you're talking about is this like return. But what I'm hearing
Yeah.
from the question is like, you came to Ghana. I'm a Ghanaian woman. I wasn't
Yeah.
born here, but I've lived every summer of my life here. My husband is went to high school in Ghana and I met him in the US. My parents have spent their whole career in this work. My sisters are very connected to Ghana. And so coming back, as like I talked about, I had to put the whole conversation in context to help you understand how to build this environment and the business that I built from a business side, but from a personal standpoint, yes, I think that culturally coming back to Ghana as an individual, right, and taking all the structure of what culture would identify me as, like as I
Yeah.
talked about, was extremely liberating, right, to be able to say
Yeah.
that as a young Ghanaian woman who was raised abroad, raised in the United States, that I was able to come back home. This is my home, my blood home, and
Yeah.
start life again, and also raise a child who's now 16, a girl, right, in the
Yeah.
shadow of her new culture, where she came here when she was only 3 years old, and to be able to see her, and I'll say that appreciate what it means to grow up in her own country, right? And to take the nuances, what I'm learning, or what maybe some of the things that I forgot, right? And that now
Yeah.
I get to wear more fully is very important. So when you asked me the question, I kind of just wanted to answer it first as like a reframing of, yes, I came as this individual who was, relocating, right?
Yeah.
But at the
Yes.
same time, the choice was very specific. Like we wanted to move home. We wanted
Yeah.
to living in New York City in our 2 bedroom in Park Slope, wondering if we are going to move from Park Slope to New Jersey,
Yeah.
understanding that New York City was wonderful, but it created a lot of pressures. And then wanting to understand what it would look like to live a married life, a young love life like my parents did when they were at Legon. What would it feel like
Yeah.
to be in their shoes again in this new modern space of living? And how could we replicate their story, honor it, and then also show them that it was important and okay because they also moved away from Africa. They
Right.
left Ghana to establish, I'll say it in a very romantic way, a better position for us and
Sure.
them. But
Sure.
then we came back here to replicate a whole different story. For a lot of that generation would be very confusing, very confusing.
Yeah.
Although they were supportive, yet initially curious, and then eventually proud that we have built a new legacy and a story around a story that they started for us, right?
Yeah.
So I look at that as a culture prompting question.
Okay, so during that whole time of transition, you were
Mhm.
a practitioner? Were you teaching at all at that time?
Yes, I mean, as soon as arriving in Accra, maybe within a few months, I was exploring the opportunities to work. And so this is a great working in yoga,
Right.
right? To
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
think about
exactly.
relocation and what am I going to do? And of course, the legal environment was compelling. The
Yeah.
financial environment was compelling. And as I explored all those things, I landed on always coming back to teaching, which is yoga,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Always coming back to finding that client, just finding me. And in all that work, even in the early onset, I think, again, I can be proud to say that we can show off our multidimensionality because it brings a bridge to what we do. But I did also spend a few years of my time early days as a Ghana executive director of a NGO that does child
Okay.
rescues here in Ghana. So specifically working on child trafficking, which again is a healing practice in terms of how our work can relate on so many levels. But
Yeah.
always, yes, and from early days, from the moment I arrived, oh, you're a yoga teacher, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
always the
Yeah. Yeah.
bridge. Can you, and one of my first clients really helped me establish that to say, like, I can't just teach privately. So I was driving to people's homes and I needed a place for them to come, and that client experience made me realize I needed maybe a space. And
Yeah.
so by going to this hotel and renting a small unit, thinking I would just service private clients and come there a few days a
Yeah.
week, turned into one student to 15 students to the hotel loaning us a room that could hold 30 people because the
Yeah.
place I had rented was too small. And then
Yeah.
after right before Christmas, 3 months in, doubling up the space to hold 25 people. So
Yeah.
really all of the experience of teaching led me to, I think, what we'll call business ownership. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes also a lot of practitioners have a lot of conflict of saying, like, I want to be able to be known as a teacher and a practitioner versus, well, actually, unfortunately, you own a business. And so what
Totally.
are you going to do about that? And that's
Yeah.
hard to wear both hats at the same time. Particularly for me, I would prefer to own the teacher hat if I could all
Sure.
the time. But as you know, and we know in talking about this on this podcast, there's a whole other dimension to what, as you talk a lot in your work, that are we being prepared to
Yeah.
do this work?
Yeah.
Have any knowledge or like how do we know what we're getting into? How are we
Yeah.
being prepared? How is the industry preparing us?
Okay. I have like 17 questions in my head, but I'm gonna say the
Mhm.
I'm gonna give you two questions and you just pick whichever one you want to answer. One is gentle, one is not so gentle. I'm going to start with the gentle one first. That is this idea. My favorite thing about business ownership is I find it wildly creative as a person who writes and creates art. And you also create art and we're trained to do so. I would be
Yeah.
curious to hear your thoughts on the intersection of business ownership and creativity. And the
Mhm.
second, not so gentle question is that I feel like yoga as an industry all over
Mhm.
the world circles around the idea of trauma regulation. And I feel like you also would have a lot to say in how we do that based on the fact of just your work of working for the NGO and working for the Manhattan District Attorney. And
Mhm.
so either of those, whichever one tickles your brain, I want you to talk about those
Yes,
things.
yes. I mean, I think we can go with the I think the audience, let's hit them with the harder question, right? I
Okay.
think, and I also again just admiring all the work you do on asking us questions that our industry just has not been available for whatever
Yeah.
reasons, that I think this
Yeah.
is good to start with that one. I think you said it right. You're like, yeah, the industry has kind of platformed, from what I'm hearing from the question, like this whole concept of trauma regulation, right?
Yes.
And all over, we talk about I mean, now it's nervous system regulation, and like that's a lot of like things we're seeing on like on our sponsored posts now, and it's becoming part of a lot of people's vocabulary that weren't
Yeah.
really probably even comfortable with these terms or knowledgeable of them at this point. But here in Ghana, I think that I would say that I think that trauma is from what we're developing all over the world is still a very nurtured but academic word. I think that
Okay.
it's important for people to value and care about how they understand what trauma is, because I think what I'm just saying is used very loosely a lot.
Yes.
And if there are any psychologists, psychiatrists sitting here today, any people who are working with people in crisis, or just people who are moving through the world and trying to get through, we do know that the word choice and how we culture the word, how we put it in the test tube and mix it up and put the dye in is very important to how people claim it in their lives, and then how they associate it with it, and then how they heal. So I think that in Ghana, we are, and now because there's this been post-COVID, I always say this story, like post-COVID in Ghana, we all went underground. It was an incredible period where people, I think for more than just the US, definitely in Ghana, people just wanted to now, they were like, I just want to stay alive. Like I now
Yeah.
understand what this whole
Yes.
longevity conversation is. So they were
Yes.
in their homes, locked down, looking, okay, now what is out there for me? And then I'd say the yoga practitioner, well-bodied, well-embodied person became like a rock star in the sense of now people
Really?
were ready to come out of their houses and look for us. And not to say they
Yeah.
hadn't been looking for us before, but people that had been further removed from what wellness, healing, getting in tune with your body, all that concept, all that portfolio were like, whoo, I want to learn more. So I think right now, I'd say in Ghana, we're now at the point of being responsible, having to be more responsible about our practitioner work in how we're sending people into that environment with the use of the word.
Yeah.
How do they identify with it? How are they experiencing it? How are they defining it? Who is holding them in it? Who is journeying with them in it? Because I think that in our environment currently in Africa, also just in general, that trauma has to be specifically cared for and how we build this new, I would call this new embodied education. Not to say that our culture in Accra, Ghana, around Africa is not aware of what healing looks like because we have built indigenous
Sure.
healing practices
Yeah.
from thousands of years ago. And so we are the source. The first humanoid was found in Ethiopia, right?
Yep.
So we have been building this biology for centuries. But in this new, more modern age, the use of trauma, we have to really look at it with care. So it's just not assigned to like billboards for wellness events.
Yeah.
And people are associating with the word, but maybe they haven't. So ultimately, I'll just say globally, I still do believe that trauma, the word, is a very academic, um, elevated term. And we maybe need to continue to find ways to break that down, not to break
Sure.
it, but to break that down to make it more accessible and understood. So people will utilize that in their personal stories in a safe way. And
Yeah.
particularly for Donna, who is now has woken up to this longevity conversation and now are self-identifying with some of the things that they've been struggling with, and are more open. And this is more of a lifestyle choice to explore it. Although it has been here for centuries and we have held each other in different ways. This is the modern take, I think, using
Yeah.
the word here in Ghana. Hmm.
Okay, I'm fascinated with this idea because I think in the States, what we did in yoga, specifically wellness in general, is we burned hot and fast in the 2010s and we burned out. And what I hope for you, what I want for yoga wellness elsewhere in the world is that
Yeah.
you all have enough awareness of our mistakes to build the infrastructure before you burn. Like what I want is, credentialing organizations that make sense for you all.
Mhm.
And for you not to default to ours because ours are nonsense. They're not doing their jobs. So and I want that for us in the States too, but I think there is an advantage to be able to look at our hot, fast fire of yoga and wellness
Mhm.
and say, This is how we can slow the burn. Quick break to tell you about the Back Room, my Patreon community for yoga and wellness professionals. Here's what it actually is. Every week you get a focus prompt, reflection sheets, and a shared working rhythm that you can drop into on your own schedule. There's no live calls, no required check-ins, no one telling you to hustle harder. There's a quarterly book club and access to a growing archive of guides and reflections, all connected to this work that we do on the show. It's built for people who want to think more clearly about their careers without the noise of social media and public discourse. It's $8 a month, and there's a free tier if you want to try it first. Find it at thesunlightexperience.com/thebackroom, and the link is in the show notes.
Yes, and I love what you said about, and I have my note, I just have to write that down because you said hot, fast, and furious, and I think I'm just gonna make it HHF. It's like I'm gonna make a t-shirt for it, but I think you nailed Rebecca, a really great way for us to continue to cross-pollinate about being here in Ghana and you being in the US, is that yes, now Ghana is in a hot, fast moment, just like furiously moving, where we have now bloomed to this new season that it's like we now have matcha, we now have Pilates, we now have all this I call it a synthetic wellness culture that has moved into the visuals and the beautiful industry that's drawing a lot of tourism, drawing a lot of wellness travel. But at the core of it, it's questions like, how is this going to be sustainable if the practitioner that's now being taken like on a slide? I mean, we even have people contacting our studio asking to rent yoga mats. I mean, I never thought I would get to this point in my life. I've been running a studio for 13 years and I get calls all the time in this new year. We just want to rent mats. We just want to rent mats. Like it's a profession now. So what are we going to do with this? And this conversation, I think, is so wonderful that if we pilot this out there to folk in our community, that I think a lot of practitioners aren't yet thinking about this, because I think that, Rebecca, you have to understand how special you are in your work, in the awakening that you bring by these questions you're asking, that we have to really understand that not all of our practitioner friends and colleagues that we're sitting with, that we're friends with, that we're supporting, really have met us at this point yet, are even questioning, how are we going to sustain, or am I being held well? Where some of us are still just working in yoga. And we haven't figured out that we might need some clarity, right?
Yes, I feel, and again, so good, bad, or otherwise, the US or North America can be sort of a cautionary tale. I think our work is different. What we face is different in the States, and perhaps not to be alarmist, but what we face is a bit more dire because we burned hot and fast during, and this is the US's history of deep individualism. And our industry in the States was built by deep individualists, people who believed very strongly in the work of the individual, and that was what we were called to do. And I know that not to be true. I look at it, it doesn't work. That model doesn't work. We've seen 15 years of it not working, and so many people struggling, and not enough people being nourished by the work that they felt called to do with. I think the advantage that other places can do is say, we can do this as a community. We can do this as a collective. We can build something together. My hope is that, and I suspect that in Ghana, you would be more collective or community minded to begin with. So convincing people to make friends is like, I feel like so much of my content is just like, you guys know we could be all friends, right? like we could do this together instead of being sad separately. I want that for you.
Yeah, and I think you spoke when you talk about individualism and the culture of what America is, productivity, and like everyone, do you know your neighbor? No. Is it okay to not know your neighbor? That's fine, right? It's that culture. It's true. It's been ingrained in us. And somebody like myself who also went to school and college and graduate school in the US and is every year's in and out, I understand that. And I think that though Africa, we have been communally privileged by our ancestry to be in circle with each other, that that we've built kingdoms, we have tribal relations, we have
Yeah.
queen mothers and kings and all, and that's beautiful. But if you think about the modern culture and
Yeah.
industrialization and colonialism,
Totally.
and we have to bring that back to this conversation, that we that mist came here. And we
Yeah.
are now piloted also, I think, to live in the shadow of individualism in many
Yeah.
ways. It's still, it's something that has been ingrained in our culture, maybe our systems, faith-based environments. There's a shadow of that mentality. And so I would say, even here being said, as a wellness practitioner and wellness leader, it is also, I do find the difficulties of trying to understand how people can drop those layers of
Yeah.
individualism to, as you said, do you know that we could all do this together? And we also can talk about something, Rebecca, that I'm sure you think about a lot in the workings of yoga, that although we are barefooted and moving around space, that's what we as people assume, but that's not all the work that we
It's
all do
true.
all the time. But there is a nature of the competitiveness that has become a part of our yoga cultures in the
Yes.
United States, all over the
Yes.
world, and then to in Africa as well, that has fractured this ability for people to grow. I remember my experiences at the studio I licensed in New York, which I absolutely love. But I remember being so impressed by the studio owner because she was always looking to collaborate. She
Yeah.
was like, I'll go and teach a class at your studio, and you can come and teach a class at my studio, and I'll
Yes.
announce your workshop. And even if you don't announce my workshop, it doesn't matter. But I think that those humans in our space, and I'll call it even in our business environment of wellness, are not as many, right? Even on the shores here, where I just talked about a small introduction to the cultural context of colonialism. And maybe it's decolonization that we
Yes.
need to start thinking about in Ghana, about how we can be better able to work with each other. Why aren't we able to sit with each other? And if there
Yeah.
are things that we feel harmed by each other, can we sit in circle? Can we self-identify for the better of everybody else? I think that's the key question.
Yeah, that colonialism piece,
Yeah.
I think, is really key. And I think that, and again, you
Mhm.
can look at the states as a cautionary tale, because in the 2010s, when we were burning hot and fast, we also were financially rewarded for that individualism. Like, you made more money. So there's
Mhm.
so many different factors, right? Because we know for a fact someone will choose to get paid and feed their family before they will choose to collaborate. Of course they will. That is no
Yeah.
judgment and no shame. We all
Yeah.
need to eat, and that is our primary motivator. It becomes more difficult when we're fighting to eat to see the opportunities to make a
Yeah.
bigger meal if we all put our different ingredients in the same pot. That is a difficult
Yeah.
thing to visualize, I believe, in
Yeah.
human nature.
Yeah. Yes. And you said it so beautifully. Like, if everybody has one pot of soup and somebody's soup is really full and they have all the potatoes and they have all, and
Yeah.
why are they gonna, share that if they know, well, they know she has soup too, but her soup, imagine as well soup, her soup may be smaller, but she's able to manage with that. So I'll just
Yeah.
stay in my area and keep mine and build mine and keep my, like COVID, keep your cabinet full of toilet paper, right? And go to the grocery store and take as much as you can and hope that, and somebody calls you and you're like, I'm sorry, I don't have any, right?
Yeah.
So this culture of, of hoarding success, hoarding profitability, what you said, like
Yeah.
you said, rewarded in the 2010s in yoga, rewarded us, right? And now what's next for us now, when, and I think you can identify with this, that now the yoga studio, even if we talk about working in yoga, the concept of a yoga studio has completely dynamically changed
Yes.
post-COVID, even before COVID. Like, we're no longer having to operate with like full service locations. And actually, studios that offer 20 yoga classes a week, do they even exist anymore?
Yeah.
Like, what are we looking at? And that at a time was profitable and was like where people
Yes.
had made lives around that. But now that a lot of those structures are gone, or because there's Pilates and like people are doing more walk clubs or run clubs, and the structures now beneath us are different, who's going to benefit, right? Who's going to
Totally.
survive? And I think in Ghana, we're noticing when we talk about the economy of wellness, that people that survive had made either smart choices, meaning, or that were highly resourced to be able
Yes.
to add in the weight of, I can keep this open because I have this sum that will just personally keep me going.
Yeah.
But really now, we're starting to question this as a profession, right? How is this a profession? How does it look? Who are we? How are we able to make a living within a paradigm when people really need us more than ever? And they're coming at us
Yeah.
strong. They want to pay us. And yet, there's still the economy to scale. Are we being valued for our work? Are we being paid enough? No, for our
Yeah.
work.
No.
And then, but yet, they still want our work,
Yeah.
so it's a wonderful question that you're asking, a wonderful part of this dynamic conversation we're having.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Make sure that y'all stay tuned for part 2 of the conversation coming up next Thursday. Until then, let's go get to work, and I will catch you around the water cooler next time.